Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, from wherever you're watching. This is another incredible podcast. I have, I believe, an icon of martial arts. I also consider him a good friend. We've known each other for a lot of years. I've attended some of his lectures on the historical perspective of martial arts. He's a great lecturer. And I have his resume here, but I don't have a 3-hour podcast. So I can't go through all his resume, but on behalf of TMAI and my producer, Erik Adams, I'd like to welcome Hanshi, John Sells.
Thank you for having me, Sensei.
It's a pleasure and honor. I want to make sure that I hit all the highlights and that we tell our audience who you are, what you've done in your illustrious career of martial arts as a beginner back in, I believe, 1964. Was I even born
Yes.
back then? I don't know if I was born. I'd have to
Well,
check
you
my
know,
birth certificate.
You were around.
I was around. But first and foremost, I don't want to forget to announce, because I have one of your first copies of Utante back when you first published the first one. And I'm proud, if I can hold this up a little bit, Mark, I'm proud to say that I have several copies of the second edition and The Secrets to Karate by John Sells. And I recommend this book. First, I've told my whole organization they got to have this book. It is a wealth of knowledge and things that, unfortunately, a lot of people spend a lifetime in martial arts, as you well know, and never get the secrets, never train under the right people, never explore, never do their due diligence about their own secrets, about their own styles. And this is a thick book. It's got a lot of years of experience, and Sensei John Sells dedicated a lot of years to this. So I highly recommend this to all the individuals that are watching this podcast and want a true book on the history and the secrets of martial arts. So congratulations, Sensei, on your second edition. Would you like to say anything about the book?
Well, I just say that it was a long time coming. I was telling my wife today that, I started that manuscript. The first manuscript was produced 37 years ago.
Wow.
And it went through several iterations, and it was first published, almost over 30 years ago now. And then the second edition came out in this century. So there was a lot of battles with this, but I'm really glad that I was able to do it.
Well, I'll tell you a story you may not remember. A long time ago, after I received your first book, and we were at some gathering someplace together, and I asked you the question, and I told you naively, you know what, I'm thinking about writing a book. And you said, let me caution you. And you gave me some advice that I was kind of shocked at first, going, really? And I said, there might be something to that. And I haven't written a book ever since. So
Caution still stands.
So I've got to either credit you or blame you for not writing the book that my wife says and all my seniors. When are you going to write the book? I always say, talk to John Sells. Leave me alone.
Well, do what you think is best.
I'm sorry, Sensei. I didn't know you got into politics. Well, Sensei, let's get this podcast rolling. I want to look at your resume, and I've seen a lot of resumes in my time. I have a resume also, but I've always been impressed by the journey of a senior, someone who's at our age. Just in case the people watching us don't know, we were both born in 1949. I was born in June, and you were born in November.
That's right.
Which officially makes you the old guy.
I am old, yes.
Oh, you're my senior, but we've been around. I'm celebrating 50 years this year of martial arts training, and as a side note, I've sent you an invitation to be there in December for my 50th anniversary. But
Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So that means you celebrate 50 years of martial arts training, don't you, or have you already?
Well, it's in the past now.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Which makes you older than me, of course.
I started training in 64. I started researching what to train in 63.
Yep.
I was always kind of a nerd, so I would research stuff first.
Which most people don't do. I didn't. I just jumped in and I stayed with it until I had to jump again, and that's normally the life of a senior. And so as I was reading your resume, I've got a wealth of information, some of it which I won't express in the podcast because it would take me too long. But I wanted to hit some of the highlights to really give a glimpse to the young guys, the guys who are coming up, the showdowns and knee downs, maybe even brown belts, who say, I studied this, I started with my sensei here, and they're thinking, I'll probably finish my career with the same sensei. Now, that may be or it may not be. I know I haven't experienced that, you haven't experienced that, and most seniors that I know have never experienced that. They stay for certain reasons and they leave for certain reasons. And so your history is why it's incredible. I never knew that you were a Kempo man at one time.
At one time, I followed a couple of Kempo guys around while I was in high school, as a matter of fact. His name at that time was Steve Sanders, and he was an up-and-coming young tournament guy who was a student of Ed Parker and Chuck Sullivan. And he taught in my neighborhood, and I gladly went to his lessons. And he was a good friend back in those days. And the reason why I went to his lessons because they were free. And I could go on alternate nights from where I was paying to go at Shotokan Dojo.
Yes, speaking about Shotokan, I believe that talking about when does a senior receive his grading and his ranking, that's always that's normally not even discussed with individuals. You only know Hanshi is a ninth dan.
Right.
And you never go backwards and say, well, when did he get his eighth and his seventh? And then he was was he really a showdown? Yes, we all start someplace down there. So as I look at your resume, it's just incredible. I've got here, and of course you'll correct me if I'm wrong, in 1968, obviously before then, you received your first black belt in Shorin-ryu.
That's correct. And that's because I moved away from LA to go to college. And I joined both the college club, which was Shorin-ryu, as well as the karate class for PE credit, believe it or not, at the University of Redlands, which was Kyokushinkai. So I was doing both concurrently at the same time. And
you talk about two opposites.
That's right. I received my first black belt from the Shorin-ryu guys, George Torbett and Mickey Janek.
You know what's incredible to me also? The fact that you can remember the teachers' names who gave you those black belts. That's a credit to you and the impact they must have had on you.
Oh, well, I spent a lot of time with those guys, and a lot of their feet and fists connected with me often, and spent a lot of sweat and blood on their dojo floors. So I knew them quite well, spent a lot of my time with them, and you bet. And George Torbett remained a friend of mine still is.
And these individuals are still with us.
George Torbett certainly is. He's retired to Idaho.
Is that in this country? I'm a California man, so anything outside of California, I know nothing of.
Well, I'm a native Californian too, but I dip my toe outside occasionally.
I know that. I like to jump to the 70s, 70, 71. 71 is ironic for me because that's when I took off to live in Japan as an Air Force kid, 71 through 75. And I see here that 70 through 71, again, you earned a Shodan in Shotokan.
That's right.
So now you have Shorin-ryu and a black belt. And I don't know if you ever got a black belt in Kyokushinkai.
No.
The class in Kyokushinkai was my freshman year in college for PE credit, and the instructor graduated at the end of that year. And so they actually gave me that job of the PE coach for karate after he graduated, and I kept that job after graduation for a few years and taught karate at the University of Redlands.
Now, did you jump to Shorin-ryu or Shotokan, or did you continue?
No, my heart always belonged in traditionalist Japanese karate. So I taught basically Shotokan with a lot of the fighting techniques I picked up along the way from Kempo and Shorin-ryu,
That
and the Kobudo that I picked up in Shorin-ryu.
That must have been quite a varied class, very eclectic from what I understanding.
It wasn't really as much as you would think, because after getting a black belt in Shorin-ryu, it became mostly fighting style. All we did was fight all the time, and sparring we call it, but it was a little bit rougher in the days before lawsuits. And I kept going to that dojo on Saturday open black belt sessions anyway. But I was from LA, so I spent my summers, in college back in LA. And so I went to Shotokan classes, and I went to several different places, including Nishiyama's, Oshima's school.
Yes.
And another man who taught in South Central and Compton, whose name I won't mention, who had a couple of dojos, who was a Shotokan guy who'd come out of the Air Force also.
He must have been a good man if he came out of the Air Force.
Yeah, he had a good dojo. And I taught there during my my last year that I spent in Los Angeles, which was 1970, the last summer.
Well, in that same time period, as I look through your resume, 70 to 71, you also earned your second degree black belt in Shorin-ryu.
That's right. George gave me a second degree black belt while I was actually a junior in college. And I earned my third degree black belt after graduation in Shorin-ryu.
Now, Sensei, what I didn't ask you was what form of Shorin-ryu was it?
Good question. It was Shobayashi-ryu Shorin-ryu.
There we go.
George Torbett, Mickey Janek, and Tony Janek, who had the Shorin-ryu Academy of Karate in San Bernardino, California, when, by the way, it was quite a different town than it is now, earned their black belts under Eizo Shimabukuro in Okinawa when they were in the Marine Corps.
Wow, you just mentioned a name that brings me, Sensei Shimabukuro did me a solid, which I'll talk about in my own podcast, but
Outstanding. Yes.
Really a fine man, really a fine man.
I had the opportunity to actually train under him, and he is a fine man, but that's where their initial training came from. They were all black belts when they separated from the Marine Corps, set up their dojo, but they went off in a more experimental way. They were interested mostly in fighting. And so it was a hard knocks dojo, I would have to say. It was the same dojo that a year before I got my black belt, Bill Wallace, the old tournament champion from those days, got his black belt in.
Wow. Well, you mentioned Marines, so that kind of defines the main activity at the dojo.
Yes, it was quite that.
I didn't meet many Marines in my time that were really good at kata. They were okay, but nobody wanted to fight them.
I will say that George Torbett did know all the kata and the kobudo kata from Eizo Shimabukuro's dojo, and he did teach them. However, we never emphasized them in training.
As I look at this time period and I look across where you put comments on certain things that I'm not mentioning, but this one, we have a connection because I went through the same thing. Can you talk a little bit, if you feel comfortable, about the Jim Kelly thing at the championship and what happened in East Los Angeles?
Well, I told you that I was teaching for a gentleman who had a couple of Shotokan dojo in South LA and Compton during the last summer that I spent in Los Angeles. And he sponsored and promoted a tournament in Compton in 1970. And he asked me to come back during the school year to direct the tournament for him, which I did. And there was a lot of competition there, a lot of different people. Saul Escoval and Tino Tuigliosia from Lima Lama were there. Jim Kelly, Benny Urquidez was there. And the final match was between Benny Urquidez and Jim Kelly.
Wow, that must have been something.
I knew Jim because Jim taught at a neighborhood dojo a few blocks from my house where I grew up, at least the last 8 years that I was in LA. that was owned by a postman who opened the dojo so he could learn karate, and he would hire karate instructors. Jim taught there, and during the summers and vacations, I would go and work out with him. He was a real jock before the era of jocks hit mainstream, and so I knew him quite well. But that final bout was between Benny and Jim, and it was won on an interesting strike to the groin from Benny to Jim.
Wow. And
there was a lot of emotions in that tournament from the spectators. And that there was almost a riot. And it was one of those things, those LA things where cliquish and ethnic tensions rose very high. And it manifested in a kind of bad atmosphere that was such that I never felt inclined to return to LA since then.
To go to an open.
I'm sorry?
I said to participate in an open championship.
To participate in an open championship or to live.
No, okay. Well, you know what? I told you that I had a connection that when I read that, it brought back a memory. When I first arrived in LA, I met a lot of the seniors in this area, and I won't mention any names, but one of the seniors invited me to a Los Angeles championship that was being sponsored by Arnold Schwarzenegger back in those days. It was the I believe the LA Open, and I was to go and help out with the traditional divisions in an open championship. And I thought that was quite unique to have a traditional small championship within a much bigger open championship. And my experience was there was a big fight between the black belts, the finals. I had maybe 20, 30 students there with their parents, and I had already talked to them about Okinawa championships and how respectful and traditional they were, and everybody knew their place and, kind of do the right thing and be respectful. And sure enough, the last two guys fighting, one from one dojo, one from another, rival dojos, and the outcome was not accepted by the other ones. And Sensei, they flew out of the stands. This was women, men, children from both sides, and they did have a riot. They had to call the police in. The whole place was shut down, and my parents were looking at me like, "Okay, what happened to all the stuff you told us about championships?" And I had to apologize. I did exactly the same thing. Yes, and I had never been exposed to it. I came from Okinawa, and you know how Okinawa is. Everybody is the way they are. So I told the promoter, who was a friend, still a friend, I said, "Don't ever invite me back because I'll never come back to an open championship after that." So we both shared that experience.
That was one of my last experiences in that world also.
Yeah, it was quite enlightening, and also gives you appreciation for our world and how our championships are held, and the decorum and the respect and the customs and courtesies. So it made me very happy to be a traditionalist on that day.
That's right.
Okay. Now, Sensei, let's go to 72 through 74. You receive your sandan in Shorin-ryu.
That's right.
Is this still with your teachers?
When I received my sandan, I also gave notice that I would be permanently going over to Shito-ryu. And I had met, I was living in Redlands, California, which is about 60 miles, east of Los Angeles, and where I went to college. And I found an instructor named Del Saito who was teaching traditionalistic Shito-ryu in the same city that the Shorin-ryu Academy was in. So I hooked up with Del Saito. He invited me to train with him. And I decided to, because of my Shotokan background, I'd always missed the Japanese style atmosphere. And I wanted something that had that atmosphere along with weapons, and Shito-ryu was the trick. Now, I had known about Shito-ryu because as a kid, of course, I had been around tournaments where Fumio Demura, who showed up in the States in '65, had been and demonstrated, and I'd met him. So I was familiar with Shito-ryu.
But back in those days was, just as a side note, in fact, I'm having Fumio Demura Sensei on a podcast next month.
Outstanding. We have
but-
more to talk about him.
Yes, we do. But back in those days, was not Fumio Demura a Shotokan practitioner?
No, let's get this story straight. He moved over from Japan because Dan Ivan went over to Japan. Dan had a lot of connections in Japan because he worked there in the Army Criminal Investigation Division after World War II. And so he knew a lot of martial artists over there, and he had a string of karate schools in Orange County, California. But he wanted a Japanese instructor to take over most of the teaching duties at his main dojo and for his organization. And when he got to Japan, everybody was talking up Demura because of Demura's tournament reputation and his big win of the old All Japan Championship tournament. And so he got Demura over here the same way he got Hidetaka Nishiyama over here by helping to get his visa and all that sort of thing. And when Demura came over, obviously Mr. Ivan was teaching Shotokan because he had trained under Mr. Obata, one of Funakoshi's original students.
Right.
However, the style became officially Shito-ryu because Mr. Demura came from Itosukai Shito-ryu under Sakagami, as well as Kobudo under Shinken Taira. But because the studios and all the students were already training in Shotokan, Mr. Demura did not want to make a big disruption in style and curriculum.
Absolutely.
So he adapted to Shotokan and I'll say our later on, but the base style there was Shotokan with the mixture in of Itosukai Shito-ryu. And so Mr. Demura adapted himself to Mr. Ivan's Shotokan.
A very good political move and respectful of his sponsor.
Yes, and that continued on for 20 years.
Yes. Very interesting. Another tidbit of information that I now own.
Well, I'm glad, because people were surprised. And as we'll talk about later, when they came to the Demura Ivan dojo to find out what we were really doing.
Absolutely. So back in 72, 74, then you receive your sandan in Shito-ryu. And one of the nice things I see here that I've never been able to do is instruct karate on Sunset Beach in Hawaii. Tell me how that happened.
Well, that was fun. Well, Del Saito is from Hawaii, and he's a Hawaii boy. Mr. Saito now has Saito Ha Shito-ryu and is based here in Oregon. But at that time, he had separated from the Air Force also and was teaching karate in San Bernardino. And he had friends in Hawaii still who had a dojo affiliated with him. And he went back every year for several weeks, spent time training and visiting family and friends. And one summer, he took me with him, along with several of our students, because I was still teaching at the university and I was now teaching his system essentially. But we went over there and I had to share teaching duties, of course, while we were over there. And we trained all the time, but we did a lot of sightseeing and going up into places that only locals knew, that sort of thing.
Fantastic.
That's what happened. And there was a rec center right on the beach, and that's where we taught.
So basically by 75, you are a Shito-ryu man.
That's right.
Shito-ryu, and both Shito-ryu and Kobudo under Shito-ryu.
That's absolutely correct.
That's correct.
Except that I was still going every once in a while, at least once or twice a month, back to the Shorin-ryu Saturday open black belt training, because that's where the good fighting was. And I was kind of into that at that time.
Wow. So you couldn't let go of the Okinawan connection.
No, couldn't let go totally. And Mr. Torbett was a good friend and had been a good mentor to me back in my college days.
So that's why in 75 through 77, I see that you continue to attend Sunday, you just said it, Saturday open sparring training at the San Bernardino Academy of Shorin-ryu.
That's right. Good friends. Some have passed on, and some I still have a connection to.
Outstanding. And then you start to publish. I see you published your first article for Black Belt Magazine back in '77. You know what?
Well,
I've
there was a
got.
little article called The Okinawans. It was a little historical piece.
Okay.
It just talked about the general narrative of how the Okinawans started karate and, you know, who the figures were like Matsumura and Itosu and that sort of thing. I was lucky that Black Belt Magazine was pleased with it and published it. But I had always been interested in history because in high school, I started a karate club in my high school that was sponsored by the high school itself. And in teaching, I noticed that the kids kept asking, they were my fellow classmates, of course, but they kept asking me, you know, what about this? Where did this come from? And I was hard pressed to give answers. So that got me interested in the history of karate because of the questions from my students back in high school.
If you remember back in those days, back when I started in '71, a lot of the instructors didn't have those questions. It wasn't part of the curriculum. It wasn't part of the teaching. You knew your katas, you knew your punching and blocks. Sensei would always talk about his personal history. But where did that come from? We just didn't know because we never asked those questions. We just went along with the flow. And then when you open your first dojo, your students say, hey, I got a question. And we always dreaded those moments because it was like, don't ask, just punch and kick like I did.
Well, you know, I can say truthfully that those things never came up and were never expressed in the either JKA or the Oshima dojo either, except Oshima was a very forthcoming man and he spoke English exceptionally well. And after black belt training, he would sit down and have roundtable discussions and answer questions with students. So that was a little bit different atmosphere.
Exactly.
Over on the other side of town.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, I'm looking at the beginning training. I'm assuming that you're saying this is your formal training with Richard Kim, the famous Richard Kim.
Yes, and that was because I relocated to Santa Barbara in the late 70s from Redlands. And when I relocated there, I actually hooked up with one of Chuzo Kotaka's his most senior student, as a matter of fact, David Krieger, who moved to the US with Kotaka from Japan and set up the original Kotaka Hashito-ryu in Hawaii. And David Krieger was now a political science professor living in Santa Barbara, California, and teaching karate at the Montecito Dojo. And it was a really nice dojo. He was no longer teaching full-time in college and just devoting himself to karate at that particular time. This was around 75, 76. And so I hooked up with him. He actually hired me to put together a testing and program and to test the students for him and to teach for him, and which I was glad to do. And he was an excellent karate man. At one time during a Hawaii versus mainland tournament, he actually beat Chuck Norris and Joe Louis and Ron Marchini in the same day.
Wow.
So he was very strong. And I benefited greatly from his training. Now, I met him in San Bernardino when Chuzo Kotaka came over because Del Saito affiliated with Mr. Kotaka late in 74. So he was no longer independent Shito-ryu. He was one of the original Kotaka Ha guys when I left San Bernardino.
So Hanshi, I'm looking at 1980 to 1988. You're still getting downranking from the Shorin people. So this must be a secret love affair for Shito-ryu man.
Well, you know, I never, simply quit altogether because there was still a lot to learn. And it was easy because I didn't really change anything. I didn't readopt any kata or anything, but I continued to train in Kobudo, of course, and I continued to go to, as much as I could, I would revisit the San Bernardino and go to fighting, which is something I enjoyed at the time. And I did participate in quite a few tournaments in those days, and I was fairly successful. So, I really enjoyed Kumite back in the day.
Back in the day. That's virtually impossible, I think, virtually impossible to do now, to split loyalties between two styles of karate. I know karate and Kobudo There's tons of people who do that, and I have tons of students all over the world that study Shito-ryu, Goju-ryu, Taekwondo, who study weapons. No conflict. But to study Shito-ryu and Shorin-ryu nowadays would probably be virtually impossible because, unfortunately...
I didn't really split loyalties. I was loyal within my Shito-ryu organization to that organization. I was personally still friends with the Shorin-ryu folks. And I was still considered a compatriot and a member, one of the gang, so to speak, like an alum, you might say.
Okay, all right.
I was an alum of that organization, so I could go back at any time. However, my loyalties and what I taught was Shito-ryu.
Okay, all right. And the rank of Godan that you received under Dan Ivan, was that in Shito-ryu or Shotokan?
Well, this is how it worked in the Dan Ivan Fumio Demura dojo. Let's backtrack a little bit because I joined Fumio Demura and Dan Ivan in the late 70s because I was living in Santa Barbara, and frankly, there was a distance between the Kotaka Ha organization and myself. David Krieger was not part of the Kotaka Ha organization. He was completely independent at that time, though he was still maintaining his own personal relationship with Mr. Kotaka. He was not part of that organization. So I moved away from that organization and I was looking for a home. I didn't want to be the instructor. I didn't want to be the person where the buck stopped. I still thought I needed training and mentoring. So I decided that the best spot for me would be to go where I had wanted to be as a kid, to the best place possible, and that was to seek out Fumio Demura and Dan Ivan. And in the late 1970s, I called them and asked to be part of the organization, and Mr. Ivan invited me in, and Mr. Demura invited me in and treated me like one of their own. The only caveat was that I had to start over again as a no-dan and work my way back up, which I was glad to do. I was teaching in Santa Barbara at the university and at the YMCA. They said you can wear your black belt, but you have no rank until you earn it back with us. And they brought me along a little bit faster than a lot of folks. And Mr. Demura would often say, John, don't worry about it, but we have to be fair to everyone else, and you have to train, and we'll bring you along. And that's what they did. And so I came up through the ranks with Mr. Demura, and in the late 80s, Mr. Ivan brought over the International Martial Arts Federation, or EMOF.
I remember that.
As a group to try to get people who had once been affiliated but lost their affiliation with Japan or Okinawa to get some traditionalistic bona fides, not to substitute for his own dojo.
Right.
And so he asked me to be a director in that organization. And I'll never forget sitting with him in his Newport Beach dojo, looking over all these resumes from all these people all over the country and trying to see what we're going to do for these guys, because Dan had a good heart. And it was a way a lot of people were able to get rank and affiliation without being in their own home group anymore. And so I came up through the ranks with Dan Ivan and Fumio Demura, and finally ended up with Mr. Ivan as a Godan before there was a change in that organization, and some people went strictly Shotokan and other people went strictly Shito-ryu, and I ended up in the middle. And that's where that story, the next chapter, started.
Yeah. That's a good place to be, and maybe an uncomfortable place to be, in the middle.
It was very uncomfortable for me because I had a loyalty to Sensei Demura, of course, but I also had good friends who had been to Mr. Demura's longest students who were no longer with him, and I didn't know what to do. And so that decision was literally made for me when the organization went into two different directions. And I decided that I'm not sure where I'm going to be, so I made no decision at that point. And fate stepped in, and the son of the founder of Shito-ryu, Mabuni Kenzo Sensei, asked me to be his direct student. And
wow.
I said, okay.
That would definitely make your choice for you.
So that was all I needed. And I had done a couple of other things. I'd set up an organization with Ben Otake, who had been Mr. Takubota's, one of his two first American students. And we started an organization simply dedicated to fighting and police tactics, not to traditionalist karate as such. And that's where I was kind of spending some energy, but I was still teaching Shito-ryu and Kobudo. So Mr. Mabuni just made my decision. I'd been doing some Kobudo work with Mr. Rudy Crosswell, who was a Hayashi Ha-shihan, and we had our own Kobudo organization, an eclectic one. We had a lot of guys from different groups, and we aggregated our various techniques and kata into a large curriculum and started the U.S. Kobudo Association.
I remember that.
And so, but Mr. Crosswell sponsored Mr. Mabuni to his dojo, and I spent a lot of time at that dojo with Mr. Mabuni. And at the end of one of those sessions, he sent his translator over to my table, and that translator said that Mr. Mabuni would like you to be his direct student.
Wow.
And that was it.
That is awesome. First generation to the Shito-ryu.
The Shito head.
Wow. We called it Seito Shito-ryu, or Orthodox Shito-ryu. And that's where I've been ever since.
So you are still a direct student to Japan and the Mabuni family.
Yes.
What rank do you currently have now?
Well, Mr. Mabuni surprised me in 1999 at a tournament sponsored by Mr. Saito in Oregon. And Mr. Kotaka, I was sitting at a table, at the front table with Mr. Kotaka and another Shito-ryu instructor named Nobu Miki. And Mr. Mabuni was the guest of honor. And he got up, pulled out a certificate of 8th Dan and presented it to me, much to my surprise then in 1999. And that's when that was my last rank. And it's the highest rank that anyone has in Seito Shito-ryu within what's called the Shihan Kai of Shito-ryu. There is no one above 8th Dan in our organization in Japan or anywhere else.
Wow.
In 2002, one of the most interesting times that I ever had, I was in Osaka sleeping, and around midnight a knock was on the door, and I opened the door. I didn't know what was going on. In Osaka, you never know, because that's Yakuza country, so I didn't know what to think. And I opened the door, and there were all these guys, these old guys dressed up in their suits and ties, and they said, "Come with us." And we went to this big Japanese restaurant that they had kept open until midnight, and presented me with the first Hanshi in Seito Shito-ryu of anyone outside of Japan, non-Japanese or otherwise.
Wow. Congratulations. Congratulations.
So that was a very interesting event, and that was the last formal ranking that I received in any kind of martial art.
And that was it then. You haven't received that. Well, you're in the same family, so you wouldn't be receiving any more. No more Shorin-ryu grades.
No. 1992, I did participate in other Shorin-ryu, like Matsumura Shorin-ryu, because several guys wanted me to help them with historical collation of their history and help them write and talk with their instructors and research in Okinawa. So I did get a 6th Dan in Kobudo from an Okinawan organization headed by Yuichi Kuda and Yabiku Takaya in 1992. But that's the only other outside rank I've ever received since becoming part of Shito-ryu.
Did you ever receive any rank from Richard Kim?
No. Richard Kim was someone who I followed around, but only informally. And I was welcomed within his group, and I knew his guys very well. At one time in my corporate work life, I used to have to go to various universities like Berkeley and Stanford, UCLA, and Caltech to recruit engineering students. Whenever I would go to Berkeley, I would go to Mr. Richard Kim's Hambu dojo run by one of his students and train with him. And that was a couple, 3 times a year. And I was interested mostly in the forms that were not part of Shito-ryu and in the Kobudo that wasn't part of the regular curriculum. So I wasn't really, converting to any style or anything. I was just looking for a workout, essentially.
Right.
And I met Richard Kim through Mr. David Krieger in Santa Barbara because he used to bring in outside instructors for seminars. And he brought in Mr. Kim on one large occasion for a long time in '77. And that was when I met him originally. And so that's when I started following. And he gave me some instruction in some Kobudo at that time. And some of it was exactly the same forms as taught by Eizo Shimabukuro, believe it or not. And so, he was available, and he was also a font of knowledge for history. So I used to, ask him a lot of questions. So that was that. It was an informal situation.
Right, which you find a lot in the martial arts. Formal occasions are normally reserved for your mentor, your sensei, the person you go to for the main meal. But there's a lot of dessert out there, and if you can have a dessert from here and there, and the teacher is willing to do that. Nowadays, I don't know what your opinion is on this subject. Nowadays, that's almost gone.
Now,
That's unfortunate.
Yes, it is. Now, if you're Shito-ryu or Goju-ryu, you simply don't go anyplace else. It's frowned upon, or you feel like I've got enough with my teacher. What do I need to practice 2 or 3 katas that I'll never do again?
It's counter to what we used to do, because even in the 60s and 70s, we would have what we called exchange practices with other dojo. The day I got my black belt, my first Dan black belt in Shorin-ryu, we had an exchange practice with Ray Dalkey from Nishiyama's dojo at his dojo, which was something that happened every year. We'd go and we'd line up, and they would line up, and we'd fight, and then they'd say stop, and you'd rotate the lines, and one of you would sit down, and another one of them would stand up. And you did it all day. And after that, after getting stomped into the dojo floor by a man named Frank Smith,
Oh, my goodness.
my first black belt. So and at the Demura Ivan dojo, people came from all kinds of styles, and they were invited to have exchange. Kempo guys came in, Taekwondo guys came in. And so it was kind of a Southern California thing at one time.
Yeah, those days are gone.
Unfortunate.
Those days are gone.
They were fun, and we learned a lot.
Yeah. Well, I believe that's how I met you at San Diego when you were doing a workshop for Arashido Sensei and Sensei Gomez.
and I met
They're
you
very
there.
close friends. I kind of
Yeah.
have a special relationship with Rue. I traveled with them to Okinawa, and I participated with them in their trainings. And Mr. Sakamoto, the head instructor of the style, is a good friend of mine. And so I have a real special part of my world. And I taught there regularly for over 20 years.
Yes, I remember you coming every year for the seminars, and it was a good time. It was a very good time.
Yes,
Do-
it was. We had a good time there when we met.
Yes, we did. Do you think that, I know that your medical condition, do you think that based on your medical condition that you'll ever get back to a level of either training or lecturing again?
Yes, I will certainly get back to sort of half lecturing, half demonstrating things, more in Kobudo probably. But in terms of ballistically trying to make the air crack and break the sound barrier with kicks and punches is probably behind me.
Yeah.
I've been warned. I've had 3 spine surgeries.
Wow.
And I've been warned that that's probably not in my future. And that's true. But that's okay. I had a fairly good run.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
And I will be starting actually in September teaching a part of the Shotokan Gashiku at Mr. Paul Godshaw's dojo in Mission Viejo, because Paul Godshaw was a dojo mate of mine in the Demura Ivan dojo for years.
Yeah.
And so I still have a relationship in Shotokan through former students of Dan and Demura.
So you indicated you're coming back to Southern California when?
September 18th and 19th, I'll be teaching at the Mission Viejo JKF dojo.
Now, are you teaching?
Gashiku.
Is it a lecture format or is it a practical
Most likely,
application?
I'll be doing lecturing and demonstrating little things,
Small little things.
especially the differences in the various era of kata and how kata evolved in different ways and the different types of kata that have the same name but look completely different, that sort of thing. And historical stuff, I'll need to show things like that. And I can manage that, but ballistically kicking and punching very strongly is a little bit beyond my physical capacity.
So, since you dropped that bit of information on me, would you be willing to extend? I don't know how long you're coming for, what you can do, but are you willing to visit someplace else and do a lecture series?
Well, I'll be there it's a 2-day gashiku, and I'll be there for those 2 days. It's a weekend, I believe. If something can be arranged, I'm open to that.
Okay. So what days exactly, since I have you on the line, what days exactly? 18th and 19th of September. And that is obviously a Saturday and Sunday?
I believe so.
Okay. All right. All right. Let's see if I can work something out. I have a large following of kobudokas. And we meet once a month for 5 hours for my 5-hour gashiku every month. And if I can arrange something, a special thing for you, I would definitely extend myself. If you would extend yourself to me, I'd love to see you personally. You know that my 50th anniversary is in December.
That's right.
And the invitation's out. Yes, we're going to have a big gala. Going to have a lot of promotions of my seniors. It's going to be a fun time. I believe you participated in my last one in 2012 when my seniors elevated me to 8th Dan. They're going to do the same thing. I follow the traditional time frame. This is 9 years later in 21. So I'll be receiving my 9th Dan from my board of directors. And I would love to have you come in if we can arrange something. By the way, I have a message for you from someone I'm assuming you know, Thomas Cully.
Yes. Well, it's a name from the past.
Yes. Well, Sensei Cully was my second teacher.
I see.
My second teacher. Will you believe that? And the most influential man in my life. I'm talking profoundly. The most influential man in my life. And Sensei Cully will be at my 50th anniversary. I'm flying him in for it.
Very good.
So he saw the podcast that I put out on your book and this meeting, and he said, he sent me a message. He said, please tell Hanshi I say happy, and also I have his first book.
Oh, well, thank him for me.
We'll do that.
Please give him my regards.
Will do. Sensei Cully's a special man. Special man. I remember him being very physical with me as a young shodan. Sensei.
Things were quite physical at once upon a time.
That's right. You and Sensei both come from that era where in Japan, Sensei was, nowadays there'll be a lawsuit attached to his name or he would be in prison.
I must tell you that for much of my early karate life, I was afraid that I would not make it home after training a lot of the time.
That's right.
I didn't know if I would actually make it back in one piece.
Or if you made it back, would you have all your teeth with you?
That was just how he went. I was always afraid for years and years that I wouldn't make it. It was
You know
really
what?
tough.
I said that to some of my students when I studied in Japan. I studied Yoshukai Karate from Mamoru Yamamoto, which was full contact like Kyokushinkai.
Oh, yeah.
And I've expressed to my students here, they said, how did it feel? I said, I always had a sense of paranoia.
Yes.
I always had a sense that I was going to get hurt in every workout. So you were always like really attuned to everything. You were sensitive, always looked around, made sure you bowed the same way. And when you had to do the kumite, full contact, no gloves, no mouthpiece, no groin cup, that it made you real jumpy. And
Yes,
they can't.
It was a paranoid existence.
Exactly.
You learned to deal with that, but that was part of it. And that was part of your learning and how to overcome those kinds of, that kind of danger, or the perception of danger, is part of the process of martial arts.
Absolutely.
Now, I hated it at the time.
At the
but
time.
I'm grateful for it now.
That's right. And only someone like us who've been through it and came through it can express that. But the young guys with the kumite, with the mouthpiece and semi-contact, no contact, 1 inch away, they don't know that world. They don't know that world at all. That was our era. And it's come and gone for most of us.
Yes, unfortunately, for the real feeling of martial arts within the traditionalist world, I think it's unfortunate, because the place where you have to go to get that is in MMA type world now.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's unfortunate that we've lost that, because I think that's an edge, and I think that does not help students in terms of their long-term abilities to protect themselves.
I agree wholeheartedly. I agree. There's a missing component, and unless you're in a dojo that still believes in that, which most don't, because liability, student retention, accidents,
Sensitivities.
right? That people are just old timers like me. When my students say, "Can you show me some of that Yosukai leg kicking or full contact chest pounding?" I said, "Yeah, but you'll probably quit afterwards."
That's right.
So why don't I just show you videos of me in Japan fighting full contact and live through my eyes? Because you would think it's something you want, but once you get it, you say, you know what? I got to go to work tomorrow, and I need my arms. I can't be swollen. I can't be.
That's right.
So I can't do that, since I'm a professional. I need my hands. So I said, that was a time. It's come and gone. I lived through it. Now you're living through your time, and your stories about my training will be history 20, 30 years from now when I'm gone, and you'll tell your students, and they'll say, can you train me like Hanshi Marquez did? And you say, oh, no, because I don't want you, yeah, it's too much. So every era has this mystical feel to it. You go, oh, I wish I was back in those days. No, you don't. No, you don't. Not really.
Well, we were connected to an era, at least I was, in Southern California, when those guys were fresh off the boat and their training was the same as it was in Japan.
Absolutely.
Because they didn't know any different.
Right, and there was no lawsuits, no liability, no, you got to be careful. That came later. Sensei, we had a lot of questions, but the time is running out. I think the most important question, from my perspective, to the people that are listening to you, the Shodans and the Nidans, the Sandans, who say, gee, if I could get one bit of advice from Hanshi, what would that be? I'd say, what regrets do you have, and what would you not do again?
Well, I'll have to tell you that I think that there are two. One is about training, and one is really about the use of time. The one thing that I would do differently in terms of karate is to really work harder. And this is hard to probably imagine, because we worked very hard in those days, but I would have worked harder on flexibility from an early age, because I was completely inflexible. I was the opposite of athletic. And it took me years to develop kicks, years. And if I could have sought out more rational and athletic exercise coaching, that's what I would have done.
We share that in common. Oh, my goodness.
I really would have done that.
I was very happy to be in a system where you only had to kick the thighs.
Right.
Because I could never kick above the waist.
Secondly, I don't think that I needed to have put as much time in away from my family as I did. And I would have done that differently.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel the same way, Sensei. I think we walk the same path, and we have the same regrets. But like I tell my students, you can't do anything about the past.
That's right.
So you learn from it. You teach your students what you did and what you think is the wrong way of going. Then they make their own decisions. But
I think that the takeaway here, though, is I started karate because I was bullied. and I was getting beat up a lot incessantly. I didn't start karate for a cultural experience. I started it simply for self-preservation. And I think that I overshot that goal a long time ago. So you don't have to go as far as some of us go to really experience it, as long as you simply train. The training is the key.
Consistency.
Yes.
Consistent.
Just train. You don't need to travel the world to do that. All you have to do is get out of bed and do your punching and kicking.
That's right. Okinawa, Japan is in your dojo, in your backyard.
Absolutely.
You don't have to fly someplace to get it. Start there. And if you have a sensei, stay with your teacher.
Well, I was fortunate in that the guys from Okinawa and Japan were living over here in that era. And so it was like basically a bus ride. I didn't know any differently. I thought that's how the rest of the world was.
Yeah, you were very fortunate. Hanshi, the time has come for me to say thank you profoundly. I want to again mention this incredible book to everyone who sees this podcast. If they're interested, how do they get the book, Sensei?
They they can order it easily by going to PayPal, Utante@charter.net. And they can buy it for $65, including postage within the US. Outside of the US, they can contact me through the Facebook, and we can see what country they're from, and we'll talk about postage that way.
Fantastic. To all the students in TMAI, your direction is me. And I'll talk to Hanshi, and I'll even get him to autograph your book.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Yes, you've been so kind to do that for me. I really appreciate it. Those that have bought the book for me were very surprised to have your signature, and I said, that's just the way Hanshi rolls. He's a good man. Hanshi, thank you so much. God bless you. I look forward to maybe in September getting together with you, and maybe in December on my 50th anniversary. God bless
Well, this
you.
has been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
It's my honor. Thank you, Sensei.
Good to see you.